I'm so cool. I'm getting loads of questions from everybody asking me about their fearful dog and how to help them and all of this kind of stuff, and I love it. I love the fact that people message me on Instagram, and if you haven't messaged me on Instagram before, or you haven't left a comment on one of my YouTube videos before, do it, because I will do my best to answer you in some way, shape or form, whether it be a direct message back or a video like I'm doing today. The thing is though, with fearful dogs and how to deal with fearful dogs, it's such a broad spectrum. There's no one answer for it. Like, I can't just say to you, this is what you have to do with your fearful dog, it will fix that dog immediately, good luck. Unfortunately, I can't do that. But what I can do is give you a very brief rundown of what I would do and the steps that you should start taking if you have got a fearful dog. So that is what I'm aiming to do right now as I sit in this car park waiting for the rain to stop. So the first thing with a fearful dog is to identify what the dog is actually scared of. So if you've got a dog that's scared of dogs, cool, it's pretty obvious. Usually the dog's going to be barking, lunging, or maybe trying to run away. Likewise, if it's scared of people, whatever you're working on, we want to identify exactly what it is that the dog's scared of, so then we can effectively create a training plan that involves those things, and we can slowly but surely work on that fear to that specific thing. Then we want to identify what the actual behavior is that the dog is displaying that we want to stop. So if the dog is super scared to the point where they're lunging, barking, trying to kill the thing, we don't want that. That's not good. Let's not try and kill anything, please. Or if we have a dog that is super scared of something, that they're trying to run away, they're trying to hide, they're just like freaking out and they're all over the place, we don't want that either. So we want to identify what we want to change, and then that moves us on to the next thing that we want to do, which is think of a behavior that we would like them to do instead of that thing that we've just identified we don't want. So the most common example of a fearful dog doing something that we might not want is going to be a dog that is fearful of a dog or a person, or a child, and they are barking, lunging and reacting to that person, dog or child. Now, we don't want that, so we have to think about, what do we want them to do instead? Well, if we are on a walk, I would say that the best thing that we can have them to do is to walk nicely on the lead by our side, instead of trying to kill X, Y, and Z on the end of the lead, because that's not a good idea. Please don't do that. So then what we do is we have to make sure that we have spent enough time teaching the dog what the alternative behavior is to that fear-based response that they're giving us that we don't want to see. We want to spend enough time teaching them what to do instead. So if it is walking on a loose lead, we have to spend lots and lots of time teaching the dog how to walk on a loose lead, and slowly but surely over time we're going to make things a little bit more difficult. We're going to add a little bit more distraction, we're going to add a little bit more intensity to these little training sessions that we'll be doing, which I'll tell you now should be about 10-15 minutes maximum, as many times a day as you can afford, but don't want to do too much. Big mistake is trying to go out for an hour and trying to work on loose lead walking. You're just not gonna be great doing that. Right, so you want to make sure that the dog understands it, and then in that process you would start in your garden or in your driveway or wherever you would start, and then you would slowly but surely start working your way to more distracting environments until the point that you're like, I'm pretty sure my dog can do this loose lead walking thing under most distraction. And then at that point you can start adding more distractions in and get closer to adding in the actual thing that we're trying to work on, which in this example would be dogs. So at this point, we're going to want to start doing a couple of things, which is desensitization and counter conditioning. Desensitization is just making the dog feel less sensitive about whatever it is that we're trying to work on. And counter conditioning is basically just changing the dog's association to something from being a bad thing to a good thing, usually by using food or some form of reward. So desensitization and counter conditioning are things that kind of come hand in hand, they kind of happen simultaneously. Desensitization, we're going to start from a far distance and we're going to aim to get closer and closer and closer, and as we get closer we're going to keep rewarding the dog doing the counter conditioning thing as we go, as we close that distance, to which point we're able to get really close to the thing. We're not seeing any bad behavior. The dog's doing the thing that we taught them to do instead. They're taking positive reinforcement, and thus changing their whole attitude and way that they sort of perceive this trigger to be. Eventually, we kind of want to phase out the counter conditioning thing, and just have it be a more neutral response around the trigger. That's actually where a lot of trainers will get it wrong, is they kind of keep counter conditioning all the time, and they just forever create this association to the trigger that there is now something going to happen, there's always food going to happen, and what it does, it kind of puts the trigger on this like pedestal that they stay on forever, and it's always going to be an event, it's always going to be something where something happens. And actually, if we want to do this properly in the right way, and we want our dogs to just not care about dogs or not care about people, there has to come a point where we're actually saying, okay, cool, I've now changed the fact that you hate this thing and you want to annihilate it, or you're trying to run away from it. Now you can actually be around it. Let's just stop talking about it now and just let you get over it. So that's where it's really important to work with a trainer when you're doing any of this stuff. I actually should have probably said that at the start, that this is not a guide. You really should have said that at the start. Anyway, you're listening to me now, you're hearing me say it. This is not a guide on exactly what you should do with your dog if your dog is fearful of stuff. This is just the process that you will have to go through, and I absolutely recommend that you get somebody to help you, somebody that knows what they're doing. You know that somebody knows what they're doing if you are doing sessions with them and you can see a consistent progression, the sessions that you're having with that person, or in whichever way you're having those sessions, whether it be online, in person, or whatever. Maybe you sent them away to somebody. You want to see consistent progression. You want to see the dog moving forward over X amount of time. What you don't want to see is the dog getting worse or just staying the same over a prolonged period of time. I would say that's a big red flag where you should just be like, yeah, you're not the person for me. I should seek somebody else's help. So, in a nutshell, that probably sounds absolutely fantastic, and let's all just go out and teach our dogs something good rather than something bad. Give them loads of food, slowly but surely get them closer to something, and we should be absolutely fine. Unfortunately, that is not the case with lots and lots of dogs out there. So there are going to be dogs out there that's behavior is so extreme that they're not going to really fall into this sort of textbook category of dealing with it, which is why it's super important that you are obviously working with a professional that knows what they're doing, and isn't going to just write your dog off because they're now doing something that doesn't sort of conform to what they may have learnt or what they have done before in the past. Dog training is not something that just goes by a book. It's every single dog is going to be different. The dogs are going to do different things, and if we're just restricting ourselves to one mindset and one avenue, ultimately the dogs are going to suffer. So we need to make sure that we stay open-minded. Obviously, we've got the core way of doing things in sight. We know where we want to head to, but sometimes there's going to be little, routes that we take off the main track that are going to lead us back there, but we're going to have to take those to avoid getting stuck and keep moving forward. So with fearful dogs, what we're going to have is we're going to have this sort of spectrum, and on this end of the spectrum we're going to have I'm so scared, I'm going to bark and lunge and react and be crazy, and on this end of the spectrum we're going to have I'm so scared, I'm just going to run away, hide, and just melt in the corner. When we're dealing with fearful dogs, we actually don't want the dogs to be at either end of the spectrum. We just want them to be in the middle. We just want them to be neutral, not feel like they need to attack and be silly like that, and also not feel like they need to run and hide and be scared. We just want them to be chill in the middle, and usually if we can get them to this point and that's where they are, they're going to be well within the realms of being able to learn and progress. If you have a dog that is at either end of the spectrum, they're usually going to be experiencing too much stress, and they will be what we call in dog training over threshold. We don't really want the dog to get over threshold. That basically means that the dog has become so overwhelmed that they're now behaving in a extreme way, and when they're behaving like that, it's going to be very difficult for them to learn anything or take in any information. So yeah, we don't want the dogs to be sort of in this like high state of arousal on either end of the spectrum. We kind of want the dog to be in the middle. Some dogs are going to be in this place in the middle, and they will be happy enough to take some food. Some dogs might still be a little bit stressed. They might not be straight bang in the middle. They might just be kind of like hovering around this area, and they might be a little bit too stressed and they don't want food. That's still okay as long as the dog is still doing the behavior. So when we've exploded to either end of the spectrum, the dog is now not in behavior. So if the dog has been taught to walk nicely on a loose lead, and this is what that looks like. So on a loose lead, we're walking nicely on a loose lead, and now we've been triggered, so we're on either end of the spectrum. You would like to assume that the dog's not in behavior, so that's where we're not going to be very successful. So if that happens, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're kind of moving away from whatever that trigger is and trying to get the dog back to this place again where they're going to be more likely to be able to learn. But like I said, then if the dog is kind of like here and they're still in behavior but they're just a little bit stressed, but not so stressed that they're unable to learn, that is generally going to be okay. If your dog doesn't want to take food initially, just don't keep trying to shove food in their face, because actually what that does sometimes is it can be aversive. So if the dog's like, I'm really scared, and then you say, hey, have this food, and they go, I don't want that food, just get it out of my face, the food can then become a negative thing, and you're then associating the food with something negative. And yes, don't do that, because you'll just ruin food drive entirely. If the dog doesn't want to take food and you're around here, they're still doing the thing that we need them to do, they're still relatively calm, they haven't exploded, that's where we're just going to push through. I would say that in most cases that level of stress is okay to keep going, and usually if we keep going in the same way and we make sure that we're still obviously avoiding this area, the dog's going to get better, and then they will fall into this place, and then we can start rewarding them again, and amazing, that's going to be great. So yeah, so if your dog isn't taking food, don't stress out too much about it. Some dogs are going to be completely different to others. As long as they're doing the thing that you taught them to do, you just say to them, good job, keep going. Over time, what will happen is the dog will just naturally desensitize to everything that's going on, especially once they realize that, if they stay in behavior, nothing bad happens. So just very quickly, if you're working on something that is inside the house, not outside the house, you basically just change walking on a loose lead to potentially being on a bed or in a down or in a sit or in a crate. And as long as the dog is doing those things, you just follow the same process of gradually getting the dog closer to the thing that they're scared of, and just building up over time, hopefully trying to get in as much positive reinforcement as you possibly can. But if they're not willing to take it straight away, you just kind of don't write it off, just wait for them to seem a little bit more calm and just sort of where we want them to be here, and then you should be able to positively reinforce again. So then there is something that I said earlier about eventually wanting to just kind of phase out all of the rewards and this whole sort of kerfuffle of moving away, coming in and rewarding, and moving away and coming in and rewarding, and but all this kind of stuff that we're going to be doing that is very necessary. We have to do it. We have to desensitize. We have to counter condition. But eventually, what we want the dog to do is habituate. So habituation is just when the dog is kind of now, neutral to it. A dog is going to be usually habituated to a lamppost because they just walk past the lamppost. They don't have any sort of emotional attachment to a lamppost. They just walk past it, don't think anything of it. That would be habituation. So to get a dog to a point where we want them to be habituated to other dogs or people or traffic, we want to go through that process of desensitization, counter conditioning. But then once we can get them to a fair distance, we do want to just sort of phase that stuff out, and then the dog will kind of no longer have this association that when we are in the presence of this thing, something happens, i.e. we get food. So we kind of just want the dog to just forget about it and stop stressing about it. Once we can get them to a point where they're so close, let's say for example if it's dogs again, we're never going to really want to be more than 6 foot away from another dog, because what we're not doing is having our dogs greet each other on the lead. Remember, don't do that. So once we can get to that point where we're kind of this close to a dog, a realistic distance away, that's it. We stop talking about it. The dog should now be at a point where they're over it. They're not sort of reacting. They're not scared. They're not fearful. They're kind of just chilling. Now we just chill and we just get over it. But again, you need to go to a trainer to help you get to that point and be able to identify when it's time to start fading that away. And then once your dog's over it, the dog's over it. If it is dogs that you're trying to work on, the most important thing there is to not get to this point and then, oh shit, you've allowed a dog to jump all over your dog, because you're going all the way back to square one, potentially. The same thing with people. You get your dog that's terrified of people to now finally be okay with people, and you're like, yeah, fantastic, we're good, let's now get on Doris to hug the dog and, you know, get all over him, no, that is going to set the dog all the way back again. What you have to think is that your dog had an idea that something bad was going to happen to them. We've now just spent all of this time changing that idea and changing that way of thinking in your dog's mind to now think, oh, actually, those things exist, but they don't do anything and we don't need to worry about them. Then you allow them to be put in a situation where they're overwhelmed again. You're potentially going to send the dog all the way back. You have to be really careful of that. At the same time, if you are doing this process and you're getting the dog closer to whatever it is, let's say it's dogs or people, and you have the right dogs or the right people that are going to help you ensure that the dog's not going to have an overwhelming experience. So well-behaved dogs or people that are actually quite calm and that are willing to take your guidance on how to actually interact with your dog in such a way that it's not going to be overwhelmed, then you can actually then create positive association to those things. And, you know, if you do that properly, you can get your dog over it and enjoy spending time with the dogs and the people and all that kind of stuff. But for some people and dogs, that's not going to be possible. That's just not realistic. Some dogs just don't ever want to interact with dogs at all. Some dogs just don't want to ever interact with people or kids at all. And you know what? That's absolutely fine. That is also something that you need to identify in your own dog and understand that if that's how your dog feels, that's it. Just don't push it. Get them to a point where they're just not reacting crazy to those things, and then just have them be habituated to those things, and then we just don't talk about it anymore. That's it. So for some dogs, it is going to be absolutely impossible to avoid stress during this process. Some dogs are just super, super scared. I have seen some really extreme cases of fear where the dogs are just scared of everything, actually. So for those dogs, it's going to be impossible to avoid stress entirely. There is going to be moments where the dog is stressed. There is likely going to be moments where the dog is not taking food. But what we need to do is just make sure that we have got that alternative behavior to continue to guide them through it without them going on either end of the spectrum and doing the bad thing that we don't want them to do. We might not be able to give them food, but at least they'll be in behavior, and through doing that thing that we've taught them how to do, they will slowly but surely learn that safety is in the behavior, not in doing the crazy stuff. So it's just super important that you're able to identify when the dog is at a level of stress that is, I guess, acceptable, and that's maybe something that you're not going to be able to identify on your own. So it's super important that you do seek the help of a professional that knows what they're doing, because they'll be able to identify that. So many dogs are actually just genetically more fearful than others. If you have a dog that's super, super scared, the place that our brain always goes to is, oh my goodness, what did I do to make the dog scared of this? Or, you know, what did somebody else do? If you've had a rescue dog and, you know, it's scared of kids, we always start thinking that, you know, it's been beaten by kids, or a dog that's scared of men has been abused by men. A lot of the time that's not really the case. The dogs are just nervy dogs. They were born that way. They're just more likely to be scared of things than other dogs are, and then they would have just had a mildly negative experience. It could just be that they saw a man and decided that the man was scary, or they saw a child, decided that the child was scary. That man or child then moved too suddenly or sneezed or something like that, and then the dog goes, yep, 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 that is scary, I've confirmed it, that's something that I don't like. They then create this behavior that is going to be running away or barking and lunging, and then ultimately what happens is that behavior makes the person go away or makes the dog's situation better in that moment. So the dog goes, okay, yeah, cool, when I get scared of that thing, I just do that thing, and it makes everything better again. It's just something that's really common that I see all the time, where people, especially with rescue dogs actually, where they go, my dog doesn't like men because it's a rescue and it was beaten every single day for 4 months of its life by men, we think. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, but a lot of the time that's not the case. The amazing thing to remember about dogs is that actually no matter what has happened to the dog and why they are behaving however they're behaving, in most cases we can make the dog better. So even if the dog has had a really bad experience with something, it's not an excuse for us to just write off the idea that the dog could get better. So Most important things are to work with a professional if you have a dog that's super scared, because with those dogs there's going to be a lot of stuff that you just cannot avoid. You know, you might leave the front door and the dog's already in a high state of stress, so it's really important that you have somebody there that's going to be able to talk you through that and make sure that the dog isn't being pushed too far, but they are still being pushed in such a way that they're going to keep making progress. You then need to make sure that the dog understands what it's supposed to do instead of the bad thing that we don't want it to do anymore, and then we're slowly going to use that to get them closer and closer and closer, and start changing that association by using as much positive reinforcement as the dog will allow us to. And then our end goal is to just have a neutral response to those things. We kind of just don't want to stop talking about it now. We're over it. The dog knows that all they have to do is the behavior that we've taught them, and they're going to be safe. They're going to be absolutely fine. Nothing bad happens. There is one thing that your fearful dog absolutely doesn't need, and that is for you to tell them that it is going to be okay. Trying to reassure a dog as if it was a human being is just never going to work. In fact, when has it ever worked? When have you ever said to your dog it's going to be okay, and you've seen them go, oh, okay, I guess it's going to be okay? The dogs are going to take reassurance through the fact that they are actually safe. They need to be shown that in a physical way. They need to actually be physically shown that they're going to be okay. So that's why we need to teach them that alternative behavior. So if you're by my side, you are safe. Look, let me show you, let me prove to you that if you are by my side, you are safe. Not let me tell you that you're going to be safe if you're by my side, or let me tell you that that person or dog isn't going to do something bad to you. It's let me show you. So that's why speaking to your dog too much, trying to reassure them like they were a human being, doesn't work, because the dogs don't care about the words that you're saying. They don't understand what you're saying. They need us to show them that they're going to be safe, and it needs to be proved to them in that way. I'm hoping that that has just helped you guys feel a little bit more clear on what you need to do with your fearful dogs, and hopefully just made you feel a little bit more relaxed about it. Honestly, it is something that is super common. There are so many dogs out there that are just super scared of loads of different random things sometimes as well. What we can't do with those dogs, though, is feel sorry for them. What we can't do is accept that that is just the way they're going to be. We have to really do our best to try and get them over it, and try and get them to a point where they're at least not freaking out and doing crazy stuff. Because the reality is, if we do accept it and we just don't do anything about it, those are unfortunately the dogs that get put down or rehomed, and that's stuff that we want to avoid, obviously. So if you guys need any help whatsoever, my Instagram is down there. Message me on there, leave a comment on this video. If I can help you, I will help you. If I can't help you, I'll help you find somebody that will be able to. Just make sure that you're staying positive. There is always going to be a way to get through it. We just have to find the right way for you and your dog to get you there. So take it easy, and I will see you in a bit.